we're going to make a start, I think, just so we can cover everything we want to cover with you today. We have got a really lovely packed panel for you today. Lots of expertise, lots of knowledge about this particular subject. And it is a really interesting subject, isn't it? And one perhaps that we don't always speak about, and certainly we don't always speak about in the workplace. I think the BBC shone a light on the subject of menopause last year, with Louise Minchin talking about her experiences, and that did a lot around this subject. So people did start to talk about it a little bit more, but we do need to continue that. We do need to keep that going. So it's great that we've got a panel of speakers here for you today. So welcome to our Let's Talk Menopause event this afternoon. I'm Jane Atherton, and on behalf of the Wish Yorkshire and Humber board, together with Paula, who's on the panel with me today, we'd like to welcome you to this session. While it is it's been set up by the Yorkshire and Humber board, it was a national event, it is a national event, and we're delighted to have people from everywhere attend the webinar today. We have had some fantastic sponsors who we've been working with to enable us to run this event. You can see their logos up on the screen now. We've been working with the Family Fund for quite some time. They've sponsored a number of events for us this year, so it's good to have them on board for this event. We've also had SKN Scaffolding sponsor us, and O'Hara Services Limited. So we're very grateful to our sponsors today who've enabled us to put this free event on and enable as many people to take part as possible. So welcome everybody. We've got a panel of speakers who are going to be talking to us. We've got Jeanette first of all, so let's have a wave from Jeanette. Jeanette is hi Jeanette. Jeanette's no stranger to women in social housing events. She spoke at a recent one around resilience that was very popular and had a lot of interaction, a lot of questions, and got some amazing feedback. So it's great to have Jeanette on board with us today. We've also got Clare Stone, and you can see Clare, she's waving now, lovely, thank you Clare. And Clare is the Executive Director of Customer Experience at Accent Group. And Clare's going to be talking to us today about her own experience of the menopause. And that's really important for us to get that personal story that actually might resonate with a lot of us. So we're really keen to hear Clare today. Then after Clare, we're going to hear from Dr. Emma Gladwinfield. She is a GP and a GP trainer, and Emma is going to talk to us about HRT, so dispel some of the myths around HRT. So those are the speakers that we've got lined up for you. We do want to enable as many questions from you, our participants, as possible. So please use the chat functionality to ask any questions. I know you're all familiar with chat because you've all been putting on your welcomes at the start of the session. We have had one question up front, so that's fantastic. That's the first question that's going to kick us off as we start at Q&A. We'll probably come to Q&A towards about 1 o'clock. But as I say, the session is being recorded, so you'd be able to see it back if you miss any parts of it. So please put your questions in the chat function, but don't wait until the end to be putting your questions in there, because as speakers are talking, it might build up the number of questions and we just might not get round to all of them if you don't get your questions in early enough. So please be putting your questions in there as we go through the sessions. Okay, so I think that's all we need to say by way of introduction, and I'm going to pass over to our first speaker. So we've got Jeanette Jackson. I know Jeanette will be able to introduce herself from you know, her experience, her own, she's not going to need me to introduce herself. So I'll pass over to Jeanette to do that. Thanks, Jeanette.
Thanks, Jane. Hi, everybody. What a delight to be here today, Friday the 16th of October. We're going into end of autumn, going into winter, and this can most certainly impact upon many people's mental health and well-being, but most certainly if somebody is on any stage of the menopause, that potentially could have a greater impact. So just to introduce myself, I'm Jeanette Jackson. I'm the director of the Manchester Stress Institute. I'm a nutritional biochemist and a sports scientist. So biochemistry is it's the biology combined with chemistry of the body. So it's fantastic to talk about the menopause because, of course, that is very much a biological and a chemical process. So it'd be great to make contact with you. We are on Twitter, and I am also on Instagram if you would like to keep in touch. And you can see here that we have a whole array of workshops available that help support and complement the menopause, because really I'm a great believer that resilience is about the menopause. And we've just launched a whole new program of Menopause Champions, and we're very excited about that. So if you want more content and more details, please do get in contact. So in terms of the menopause itself, it's a good idea to have an understanding of what the label really, I guess, of the menopause is. And NICE, the National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence, says that the menopause is a biological stage in a woman's life when menstruation ceases permanently. That's the key word, permanently, due to the loss of ovarian follicular activity. So it's a big sentence, but it's basically the permanent cessation of menstruation. So there's no more bleeding, and that's due to loss of ovarian follicular activity. And primarily this happens because, well, of course it happens, because our ovaries lose eggs as we get older. So the permanent cessation comes about because there is no more activity on a follicular level. So that's the menopause. So there are 4 primary stages to the menopause. Stage 1, which is something that we don't tend to talk about really, is actually the pre-menopause. And this is a stage where it's the first day of a menstrual cycle in a young woman to the very last day of the perimenopause. So this is known as the premenopause stage. Then we have stage 2, which is the perimenopause. Now, of course, it's difficult because nobody, not you, not your doctor, not your gynecologist, not anybody can pinpoint the first day of perimenopause, because the diminishment in the ovarian follicular activity occurs over time. So there isn't a definite defined date for the beginning of the perimenopause. But this is when the ovaries begin to produce less estrogen, typically in the early 40s. And then we have the menopause itself, which is in this country just between the ages of 51 and 52. And the menopause itself is 1 year or 12 months or 365 days after the last bleed. That then is classified as your menopause day. So it's one day, it's either 12 months, 1 year, or 365 days of the last bleed. When you've had that anniversary, you like to call it that, then we are then in the post-menopausal phase, and this unfortunately can last indefinitely. And for some people, they can experience post-perimenopausal like symptoms, and most certainly some women can experience menopause symptoms way into the mid-70s, unfortunately. But for most people, it tends to average to around about 5 years, really, where people will experience menopause symptoms. And the symptoms are incredibly many and varied. And I think when I come into organisations and I present menopause workshops and I sit in front of your staff, I genuinely do see women who are absolutely spent. They are exhausted, they're not sleeping, they can suffer from chronic anxiety, very, very low mood, no energy. It's just, the symptoms can be very chronic for a certain number of people. And you can see here that these symptoms are delineated into different categories. So on the top left, we have systemic symptoms there, such as night sweats, palpitations, painful breasts. And as we go down, we've got symptoms around the skin, itchiness, thinning of the skin. Some people can experience like a tingling of the skin, like there's something crawling on the skin. Top right, we've got psychological implications such as anxiety, memory, depressive mood. And then we have the transitional symptoms such as very short periods, huge periods between actual bleeding, very heavy periods, and then bottom right, vaginal implications such as dryness and painful intercourse. And I think one of the things that I see a lot in menopause, and I'm sure that maybe you do within yourself or in your colleagues, is can be very nebulous. So, you know, for example, it's not on here, but symptom of the menopause can be tinnitus. Well, who would even think that tinnitus is part of the menopause? You know, very, very uncomfortable and a distressing taste in your mouth can be part of menopause symptoms as well. So I think it's that inability to literally put a label on it that can create a tremendous amount of confusion for the menopause. But one of the things that I often say, and this is a mantra for me, is if you go into the menopause exhausted, shattered, stressed, insomniac, then what kind of a menopause do you think you're going to have? So a primary driver for me and my business is to work with women way before the menopause to get them physically, mentally and emotionally as fit as possible, so that when you go through the menopause, the impact is much more reduced. So let's just have a quick look at the hormones that are involved in the menopause itself. So there are 4 primary ones: estrogen, progesterone, luteinizing hormone, and follicle stimulating hormone. And if we look at the kind of program of the hormones throughout a normal monthly period, if you look at the grey bar here, that's the actual start of the menstrual cycle: day 1, day 7, day 14, day 21, and day 28. Of course, I'm talking here for simplicity about a textbook period. So in a textbook period, we have ovulation on day 14. And then the different hormones play a different role really throughout different times of the cycle. But I want you to draw your attention here to the orange lines of the estrogen, and I want you to see how estrogen peaks right before ovulation, and it's that peak in estrogen that releases the hormones that are the luteinizing hormones and the follicle stimulating hormones. And that peak in estrogen also creates a peak in progesterone. So look at progesterone, that's the green line, and look at the start of the cycle, day 1 to day 14. It doesn't get involved at all. So there is no progesterone released beginning of day 1 to day 14. And then look at day 21 and look at the green line and the peak in progesterone. Now that's very, very important for us to have an awareness of, and understanding the fluctuation in these hormones throughout this menstrual cycle, because the diminishment of the follicular activity massively impacts upon the release of these different hormones. And these different hormones have an impact on our mood and our well-being, and in particular mood in terms of depression, anxiety, and also memory as well. So I want you to really know that around about day 12, day 13, that massive rise in estrogen promotes the ovulation, and the ovulation promotes the luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone. Well, they actually produce ovulation, and then as a consequence we get a hit in progesterone. So when our estrogen starts to decline, right, that then has an impact on the levels of progesterone that are being manufactured in our body. And what I want you to know is it's not just the ovaries that actually produce estrogen. We have estrogen receptors around the body and estrogen manufacturing sites around the body as well. So even when the menopause is finished completely, you're in your post-menopause phase, you can see here from this diagram, this example, that we always have some estrogen, but progesterone can completely disappears. And and that's an issue, because excuse me, because we rely on happy hormones. And you can see here there's a number of different hormones and manufacturers such as dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And we rely upon them to give us a buoyancy in terms of our mood. And progesterone is also a happy hormone. So once ovulation is not occurring because estrogen levels are dropping so much, our progesterone levels start to decline. That's one of the reasons why some women that are particularly sensitive to the decline of these hormones can experience massive shifts in mood. And when we also have estrogen still being produced by these different sites apart from the ovaries, what can happen for some women is they can experience something that's called estrogen dominance. And estrogen dominance means that they are, like I said, particularly susceptible to the decline in estrogen. And one of the symptoms of estrogen dominance is anger. Actually, is like chronic, not even anger, but rage. And these women can become incredibly distressed because it changes their personality. So that's a key thing, I think, again, I do see on the webinars when I'm presenting. So the lack of estrogen for some women can be a real problem. And when we're looking at nutrition, that supplements the menopause, of course, what we have to do is make sure that we're looking at nutrition that can, to some degree, help to alleviate or step up within the system for this lack of progesterone. So we want to make sure that we're eating nutrition that gives us, that naturally manufactures these other happy hormones such as serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins. And then likewise with the memory. So our executive functioning is predominantly in our prefrontal cortex. So the brain, we know, as scientists, we classify the brain as something called the triune brain. And the triune brain is called that because there are three brains in one, so 3 in 1 triune. And the bottom part of the brain, seen here just above the spine, you can just see a little part of the brain there. That's called the amygdala, and I'm sure that many of you are now familiar with the amygdala. That's our primal brain and very much associated with fight or flight. And if we are experiencing fear or anxiety, there could be a hypervigilant amygdala within us. The next part of the brain that evolved for us was a middle part of the brain, and that's called the limbic system, and that's our emotional brain. And within that emotional brain, within that part of that brain, our hippocampus sits, and our hippocampus is the primary part of our brain that is associated with memory. So that's important. But on here is highlighted the prefrontal cortex, and as I've already said, that's our executive functioning of our brain. And what we need to know is estrogen plays a big part in the prefrontal cortex. This part of the brain relies heavily on estrogen to enable us to have mental clarity, mental focus, to work as an executive within the executive higher functions in terms of planning projects, planning your life as an executive person effectively. So that's important because what we know is when estrogen drops and the manufacture of estrogen drops, some women can really, really be worried about the memory. I mean, in the workshops that I presented for many, many housing associations, I've literally had women in tears worrying about the memory, thinking you've got, early onset dementia or things like that. And that, of course, then can offset itself a massive amount of anxiety and worry. And especially worry, don't we worry a little bit more in the middle of the night? In the middle of the night, it's a dark time, it can be a dark place, and all these worries come in and we've nobody to talk to, and we just get embroiled in these worries, and then when we wake in the morning we completely forget about it again. So that's one of the reasons why we put sleep in the menopause workshop. So this is just basically saying what I've just said. So estrogen and the working memory. So the prefrontal cortex mediates a number of cognitive processes that contribute to memory function, particularly working memory. And we have different forms of memory. We have long-term memory, and we have two other types of memory. So we have explicit memory and implicit memory. And implicit memory, explicit memory is, implicit memory is around things that you learn long term. So like a typist comes to learn about the keyboards and musical instruments, and you learn notes, you learn your alphabet. Explicit memory is the short term things. So remembering what you had for lunch yesterday. And it's so interesting for me when I do coaching. And we do the private one-to-one coaching, because I'll get somebody on a Skype and say, right, tell me what you had to eat yesterday, and can they remember? And then I'll ask them for a really important thing about the past, and they can remember absolute every minute detail. And this is one of the reasons why low levels of estrogen can impact upon explicit memory, and then that can then feed into the hippocampus and the more longer term memory really as well. So one thing is that this is obviously quite unique to women, because we have this massive decline in estrogen. So what we need to know is that this explicit memory is our working memory. So these are the things that you are doing today, the tasks that you're performing today, the people that you're meeting today, the names you're learning today, even the information that I'm giving you today is known as your working memory. And then the explicit memory is a longer term memory. Now, we've got a double whammy, of course, because one of the challenges with the menopause is the age at which we experience the menopause. And with aging, we know anyway that the hippocampus, which is, I've already said to you, is the memory part of the brain, starts to atrophy. It shrinks as we begin to age. So it's a massive double whammy, this, for us. So we need to have an understanding of what kind of foods will really impact positively on the brain and feed that executive brain. Women, of course, that take HRT, because they're having estrogen put back in the system, then they definitely perform better on verbal and visual and memory tests, because they're getting a greater flow of estrogen to the prefrontal cortex, which then feeds into the hippocampus. One thing I do want to say, and I've already alluded to this, is some people are more sensitive to the decline in estrogen levels. All right, so it's part of my job and the menopause champions that we're training to help them understand that these experiences are normal, and to normalize these experiences to help to reduce that fear and anxiety. And then also to share that the changes and the fluctuations in these hormones are not permanent. Yes, it'll be that when we've gone through the menopause, and if you're not on HRT, then the estrogen levels have declined and there'll be no progesterone in there. But the beautiful thing is, to enable us to reassure people, is that the body, the brain adjusts. So post-menopausal, the brain adjusts to having little or no estrogen on board, which is a lovely thing to know about, because it means that yes, maybe in the run up to the menopause, there may be some low-grade memory issues for some people, but after the menopause, the brain adjusts and memory can normalize again, and that's a great thing. One thing I do want to say, and me being me, and me being a biochemist, and me being a sports scientist, is every bit of work that I do is underpinned by resilience training. You have to be able to have an understanding of resilience and the impact on cortisol on the brain and on your whole physiology to enable strategies for the menopause to have a massive positive impact, because stress shrinks the brain in itself. So here's a normal brain, and that's a dendrite in the brain, and here's a stressed brain, and you can see that the dendrites that shrink basically. So you're never going to have a good working explicit or implicit memory if you are experiencing long-term chronic stress. So all the work that we do with you from the Manchester Stress Institute is about building upon true resilience and being able to switch off the brain and switch off that stress response. So I'm conscious of time. It's 12:30, but I didn't start for 5 minutes late, so I'm going to continue a little bit. So looking at nutrition, that's really interesting to me, looking at the Mediterranean menopause. We know that women in the Mediterranean suffer less hot flushes, less anxiety. And there's a link there between the nutrition that they're eating and the stress levels that they're experiencing and the positive impact both them two aspects combined can have on memory and core physiology. And when I'm working with people and I'm coaching staff, we're looking at not feeding you. So Janet and Julie and Jane and all these people, we're looking at feeding your cells. And this is about cellular recovery from stress, repair and renewal, and this has to be done at a tissue level. And what we know in terms of the menopause and nutrition is that we need a diet that's rich in natural herbs, and that's in terms of adding herbs into your nutrition, onto your salads and your food and things, and then phytoestrogens, and these are foods that naturally help to mimic estrogen. And so we're looking, and also antioxidants as well. So antioxidants help to reduce the impact that stress can have on our body at a cellular level. And the one thing for me, and I bang many drums about this, is not one member of your staff or anybody listening to this presentation now needs to be told to eat 5 portions of fruit and veg a day, or, apples and bananas. We know that. What we want now is the science behind that. What's happening to my body when I feed it antioxidants? How does that impact upon the reduction of disease in my system? So these kind of foods that are collaborative and help to share within your system different ranges of phytoestrogens, flavonoids, ligands, antioxidants can be incredibly powerful. But we need to make sure that we're not putting these foods and these these powerful antioxidants on a body that already has a low grade inflammatory reaction because of stress or because of poor quality diet. And I know, never having met most of you before, that that when you have a particularly stressful day, that for some people can really impact on the type of foods they want to eat. So that can be the evening when we say, right, sack it, I'm going to have a pizza, a bottle of wine, and then tomorrow I'll eat my healthy antioxidant thing. And I know from nutrition and from biochemistry, when you feed the brain and you feed the body and you balance that adrenal glands out, yes, we all have bad days. I had a bad day last Thursday, but what happens is then bad days, then they're less impactful for the next day and the next day and the next day. You can rebalance better. And when I presented recently for Midland Wish, it was about resilience in the menopause, and one of the slides I put up on there was about what does resilience mean. And we all know that resilience is about bounceability, but actually I love Darwin's theory of resilience, which is it's not the strongest that will survive, and it's not the one that's most educated, it's the one that adapts. The people and the animals that adapt will survive. And so I'm asking you directly now, how have you adapted your nutrition and your lifestyle to dovetail with the menopause that you may be going through? And that's a big part of the coaching that happens. So again, just kind of foods that are very rich in antioxidants and natural phytoestrogens, as much of them that you can put into your system, and as forward thinking as you can get with your nutrition is very important. Of course, we have to talk about calcium, because osteoporosis is one of the primary symptoms of the menopause. And osteoporosis in this country is at huge levels. We're not moving enough, we're not eating enough calcium, we're not eating enough phosphorus, we're not eating enough vitamin D in this country, and all of these collectively can have a massive impact on the quality of bone health. And in terms of bone health, sitting here now, you and I are both losing bone kind of minerals. All day, every day, we have something called osteoclasts and osteoblasts, and they break down bone to release the minerals stored in there so you can use them, and then they build up bone again. Break down bone, build up bone, break down bone, build up bone. And at the menopause, the decline in estrogen reduces the rate at which the body builds back that bone, and that's one of the reasons why osteoporosis is prominent at the menopause. So again, we've got to get that sorted out. And I've mentioned, vitamin D. That's so important, especially now. I mean, you may have seen on the news that vitamin D could potentially help build up immunity towards COVID. And one of the reasons for that is vitamin D, once it's been taken into the system, into your body, and gone through the metabolized through the liver, it acts as a natural antibiotic for us. So there's massive amounts to talk about, and that's why this is a 20-minute kind of introduction, really, I guess. So here is a salad that you can put together and you can make, and you can put it in your fridge, and you can have a large spoonful each day, and then add a piece of protein to that. And you can see, I'll let you look at this in your own time, but you can see within this salad, it's packed with antioxidants, it's packed with phytoestrogens, it's packed with vitamin D rich food, calcium food. So collectively, this is a salad that will feed your menopausal brain and your menopausal body. And I really recommend that people make it, put it in the fridge, and then have a big spoonful for lunch, or along with your evening meal, with a good piece of protein in there. So finally, from me, I just want to say, if you've enjoyed today, we've got a webinar on Monday, this coming Monday, in celebration of World Menopause Day, and it's on menopause and mental health. It's this with much more information in. I'd love you to join us. We've got a discount code if you're interested. You can email us at manchesterstress.com. And that's that. And then I just thought, because I've mentioned it, I'll tell you about the coaching program. If you're interested in you and your team looking at the coaching program, it's fantastic. It's life-changing, and I really mean that. It's a 4-week program. We do 2 weeks on immune health and 2 weeks on mental health, and it's all about feeding that brain, feeding that body. And there's a 10-day juice cleanse as well that's associated with it. So you can contact me if you are interested in that. That's me done. That's me complete. I will put a blank slide on now because I believe that Claire's going to come on now and talk about her experience of the menopause. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeanette. That was amazing. Really informative.
Are you okay?
Shall I crack on?
Claire? Are you okay straight to go, Claire?
Yeah, is that all right?
You're all set. Okay, lovely. Just before you start, I'll let Jeanette know there are lots of questions coming in for her that we'll come to at the end. Perhaps, Jeanette, you could be looking at these while Claire's speaking, and I'll come to you at the end after Dr. Emma as well. Okay? All right, so over to you. Thank you, Claire.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me today. That was an amazing session, Jeanette. So much information in there. But mine's very much more about my personal experience of menopause and how that's been at work, really, primarily. When I thought about this session and I thought about all the symptoms that I've experienced throughout my menopause journey, as we say, and looking at that graphic that Jeanette showed, I can absolutely tick quite a few of those off. I could have spent 10 minutes sharing all that with you, but I was a bit nervous that it might turn into a bit of a misery memoir, really. So I thought, well, what inflict that on you? It'd be very therapeutic for me, but not very pleasant for you, probably. And I think there is a danger that, you know, we've got to be careful that we don't put absolutely everything down to menopause at this chapter in our lives, because other things do happen as well. But I would say I wish I'd done more research as I started on this phase in my life. So that session was fantastic from Jeanette, and I wish I'd probably sat through that 10 years ago. I probably would have learned quite a lot. And then the other thing I thought about was, when I thought about this presentation, is I didn't want it to be too grim. You know, I'm a sunny kind of person. I come from Bolton K country, so we always try and see the funny side of everything, even menopause. You know, and I was going to share some stories with you about the time that I looked up from my desk and I was talking to a young male colleague and noticed that my HRT patch was on the floor right next to his foot. The time that I got the patch stuck in the zip of my trousers at work, the side zip on my trousers, and I was desperate in the toilet and couldn't get the damn thing released. I was nearly on the point of ringing somebody and saying, bring me some scissors, get me out of these. And one friend shared with me that one night she was watching telly and saw a cat walk across the living room with her patch on the back of its neck. So there's all the comedy bits as well. But I thought, well, no, I don't want to do a half an hour carry on menopause. So I thought what I would do is sort of share with you my personal journey, not grounded particularly in any sort of science, and some theories I've got about it, really. And one of those is that we still have a glass ceiling in a lot of workplaces, don't we? And certainly even so in our sector, and we like to think our sector is quite enlightened. But if you look across the sector and compare the numbers of women chief executives that have worked full time throughout their careers compared to men, not exactly equal. You know, look at our boards and look at the diversity, there's still a challenge to be had. And when you talk about that, most people will go back to the fact that women have career breaks early on to have children often. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I think the glass ceiling is happening now when you're in your 50s. And just from my own non-scientific research, from my friendship group, there's only me and one other woman that are still working full time into our mid 50s. I'm 55 next month. A lot of my friends have exited full time work, and it's never said I've done it because I was struggling with the menopause. It's because I wanted to go self employed, or I've got personal circumstances, I'm caring for parents. There's usually something else. But I actually believe that there is a dimension that is around this. So I think as employers and as organisations, we've got to really think about that, because that is a massive loss of talent. And going forward into the future, that's going to become a bigger and bigger issue for organisations. So that brings me on to pet theory number 2, which is, I think, and I don't know if this is because we're women or it's a bit like mental health, we have a tendency to individualise this. And there is absolutely loads we can do as individuals to make our experience through menopause better. And that's absolutely right. But every woman's going to go through this. So I think everybody has a responsibility to help people through this, as organisations, as colleagues, as friends, as partners, as kids. You know, it's not just for us. And we do have a tendency sometimes to sort of take it all on, don't we? And trying to sort it ourselves. And actually, for several years, I didn't practice what I'm preaching now. And that's absolutely what I did. And I'm an executive director at a housing association, and I've come through the ops route, you know, so I started off as a housing assistant, housing officer, all that front line, you know, very credible experience. And my own sort of MO really was, you know, I'm ops, I'm tough, I'll deal with everything, I'm spinning plates, you know, I'm dodging from meeting to meeting, you know, and it becomes very much who you are. It played to my personality. I liked to be seen as that go-to person, you know, if there was something to sort out, you know, she can do it and she can crack on. And I started to experience difficulties and all those things that Jeanette described around the brain fog and sleeping and sweating in work and all that stuff. But, you know, because it was the way I am, I cracked, you know, and just kept going and kept going and kept going. And I actually didn't see many other women struggling the way I was. And they probably were, but we probably weren't being that open about it. And it probably would have been quite helpful to be a lot more open about it with each other. And I think I treated it as an illness. You know, I kept going to the doctors and, you know, I kept having different things. And, you know, had I seen that chart that Jeanette has just shown, I'd have realised actually this was all connected. You know, and you get to the point where you get a bit fed up with just being told it's your age. You know, you want a bit more explanation about why that is. You know, one of my friends said at the time she felt that if she'd walked into a doctor's surgery with an axe in the back of her head, she'd have been told it was her age, you know. But it probably was, but there should have been a richer conversation about, you know, why it all connected and what we could do about that. And then the thing that really did start to bother me is I felt that it changed my personality. And certainly at work, I don't think this played out as much because I'm not a particularly confrontational person, but I was certainly far more argumentative at work, at home rather. You know, and again, a feature of modern life is a lot of us have had children older. So as I was going through my menopause journey, my then teenage daughter was entering her her hormonal journey as well. So you've got these dual things at play. But what I think bothered me more than anything is it made me a bit bitter, you know, and that's not something that is a natural feature of my personality. So I think that sort of brought me on to sort of my third pet theory, which is what's kind of worked for you in one era of your life won't necessarily continue to work for you through the next era of your life. And coincidentally, I ended up in that position at work as well. And I found that this plate spinning warrior princess who'd rush around doing everything didn't work anymore, because I'd reached a level in my career where I needed to be more strategic and less sort of frontline reacting. I needed to be more thoughtful and more planned. And I think I was lucky really that those two things came together at the same time. And what's happened for me is my sort of leadership journey at work has happened in parallel with my menopause journey. So it's been quite good to connect the two. And it was interesting to hear Jeanette talk about coaching, because at the time for the very first time in my career, I got an executive coach. And it was nothing to do with the menopause, and it was nothing to do with my own personal circumstances. It was to do about supporting this transition from being a cracking sort of frontline ops manager to this transition of being a far more strategic, visionary, leader. And I don't think leader is not where you sit in an organisation. Leader is how you are. And leaders, we all know leaders throughout our organisations that operate at all kinds of levels. So it's that journey that's really helpful, I think, or has been really helpful for me. And what she made me really understand was that thing about, what worked for you then isn't working for you now anymore. But what an executive coach will do is give you some very practical sort of tips, really, which plays to my pragmatic personality. I like a list and I like a little set of things to do. So, and it seems really simple, but we talked a lot about not flying by the seat of my pants. So when we explored what I found particularly stressful, I don't really like board meetings and committees and all that formality. And I don't like being put on the spot, so it's that brain fog thing again. And it wasn't that I was unwilling to say I don't know. I knew, but sometimes I couldn't just get it to the forefront of my mind. And what that made me reflect was actually organisations, as we all know, have grown out of sort of military establishments, haven't they? And they've grown out of a process and a structure that's largely been driven probably by the way men think and work and behave way back in the day. And actually we need to evolve that. So what it's helped me understand is there are techniques you can do to make that work better for you. So on a practical level, I'll do things now like, I'll write my board papers, off they go, and then I email everybody and say, if you've got any questions, it'd be great if you can let me have them in advance. Obviously, they still want to ask you things on the day, but it just takes off a little bit of that pressure because you've got a sense that you know what's coming. I'm a lot more planned and prepared now. I'm losing that willingness to go in by the seat of my pants. Don't quite enjoy that adrenaline rush anymore. I'm doing practical things like I used to have to write lots of reports, lots of different things. And now, we'll just do one a month. It works for all the forums. It's just about those really practical things to say, how does this make things better for me, which means in turn I'm doing better for the organisation, and it's a much more healthy experience, but it actually does help you as an individual as well. And I think the key thing as well is, and maybe this is personal to me, but it is a bit of that letting go thing as well. Being more willing to delegate. You don't have to do it all. You are allowed to say, at this point in time, this is not how I can operate. This is not the bandwidth I've got. I'm going to have to delegate all this to allow me time to focus over here, because you still turn into a more effective colleague, an employee, and probably even family member as well, because you've got that space and that time to move along. So I think, that my journey has been that sort of parallel, that twin track of sort of working through what is essentially a natural process. And I think, we've got to be careful not to turn it into anything other than that. Every woman will go through it in some way, shape or form. And we do, there are ways we can help to adjust. So I think in the workplace, we've got a real opportunity now. People like me who are of that age, to be more open about it, explain to people that things aren't working, and let's work out a way that this works better for you. Lockdown's been great, actually. I know it's been a tough gig for a lot of people, but for me personally, it's been quite good because it's taken away all my commuting time. It's meant I'm not doing lots of, our organisation's national, I'm not dashing all over the country, so it has given me a little bit more of that thinking time. And I do know, I'm not as tuned in as I should be, but I do know that if I drink booze, and I've done extensive research, it applies to everything, that it's not good. I will not sleep that night. I'll be hotter. And, now, I'd love to say to you, well, that means I've given up. I haven't. I just make sure I don't do it the night before a presentation to wish. But so you just got to acknowledge it and adjust it. I also have a very sweet tooth, unfortunately, and I know that that's a trigger. If I eat all the midget gems, I'm going to regret it. But just be aware of that. You can still make that choice if you want. And I absolutely do know I need to get outside and have a bit of a walk. Now, I could probably do all those things more, but it's made me, after years of not being very tuned into stuff like that, it's been quite positive for me, because it has made me more tuned into the, what I eat and what I exercise, and be a bit more moderate about things. So you do get to a stage where, and I still have days where I don't feel like this, but I do feel at 55, I am coming to a point where I am being more aware of my body, aware of what works, what doesn't work. And I'm having days where I do feel like it's been quite an enlightening process. And actually, I feel now I'm moving into a bit of a phrase, isn't it, that we're using a lot post-pandemic, but it's almost like I'm moving into a new normal. And I don't think it's a new me. I still think I'm exactly the same person, but it's almost like a graphic equalizer. You know, some parts of who I am have been switched up and some have been switched down. It's still exactly the same person, but there's just different shades. And I think the brilliant thing is you care less. There's a lot of stuff I used to worry about, you know, that now I don't. And I think that is, you know, that's the shift, you know, that I want to sort of shift from being this sort of warrior woman running around doing everything into this sort of serene, queen-like goddess who who actually can navigate through this. And I think the more people like me talk about it, the more we acknowledge it and the more we empower our colleagues, female and male, to say there's a better way of working. It doesn't just benefit us as women, it'll benefit everybody we work with, family members, and above all, it'll benefit the organisations we work with, because we won't lose the massive amount of talent that I think we are losing of women in the workplace. So that was all I was going to say. That's it from me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Claire. That was really, really fantastic. And we've got some lovely comments going in the chat for you to have a read through, but people really enjoying your frank sharing there. So thank you so much for that. And some really good tips from you, Claire, and also that are going in the chat for people. So useful for others to read some of those tips about what helps, things like journaling and those magnets. I'm not too sure about, I don't know too much about those, but somebody has put in there about a magnet that works for them. So
I think you had an experience with a magnet, Claire, didn't you?
I did.
Sadly,
once.
you left that out of your story.
I've had two experiences with the magnet. One, I got stuck to the shopping trolley, and once it fell down the leg of my trousers, but that's a whole different episode.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm glad I mentioned that then. So yes, lots of thanks on there for sharing and for your honesty and openness. And I think that's really important that we do talk about it and share how it's going for all of us in the workplace and beyond. It can only help other people, can't it? That's the first time I've heard that about that loss of talent. But I think that's a really interesting view and something perhaps I'd not thought about too much before, but I think you've probably got a really good point there. So we'll come back to that for questions as well at the end. Claire, if you're able to stay around. But now I'm going to come to Dr. Emma Gladwinfield, who I can see is at a social distance from Jeanette there in the studio. So I'm going to welcome you now, Dr. Emma, if that's okay. Hi.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thanks.
No, it's great to have you here. And we're already getting some questions in the chat about HRT and the like. So we'll definitely be coming to you during Q&A. But if I can hand over now to for you and your presentation, is that okay?
That would be great. Thank you. Right, so hello everybody. Okay, hello everybody. I hope you're all okay on this Friday. So my name's Dr. Emma Gladwinfield and I'm going to talk a little bit about hormone replacement therapy, or HRT as it's known.
So we're just, there you go, it just got stuck.
Sorry, technical issue there. So a little bit of an introduction about myself. I'm a GP in East Lancashire, working at a practice in Rawtenstall. Been a GP since 2011 and I've been a doctor since 2005. So I've got various interests, women's health, child health, mental health. I'm also very much into lifestyle medicine, not prescribing any medicine and seeing if we can optimize people's health without any medication. And I'm also a medical acupuncturist, and that's a picture of my 3 children being cheeky. Okay, so I'd like to start with some definitions because people do get confused. In fact, yesterday I spoke to a lady who wasn't sure she was perimenopause, menopausal or postmenopausal. So perimenopause, that's the years leading up to the menopause. And it's possible then that you'll be having symptoms of the menopause. So the hot flushes, the brain fog, the joint pain, the vaginal dryness, the lack of libido. The menopause is classified as the final menstrual period, and postmenopause, that's from 1 year after the final menstrual period. An early perimenopause is when you're having symptoms age 40 to 45. Okay, in the UK, our average age for having a menopause is 51. Okay, so we've also got this other condition called premature ovarian insufficiency. And this affects 1% of women under 40. There's multiple causes from cancer, massive trauma, psychological trauma, hormonal imbalance. And basically you have the same symptoms of the menopause. So we're talking irregular periods, not having a period, that's amenorrhea. And for this, it needs hormonal tests to be diagnosed. And this group of patients, so women under 40, they need a lot of support, and HRT should be strongly advised, because if they're lacking estrogen from say 35 all the way through the life, their bone health is really going to suffer. And also we need to be mindful of this group of ladies because their family may not be complete. So they often need referral to gynecology and possible egg storage. Okay, so a little bit about prescribing as a GP. So patient comes in, I stands for ideas. So they might come in saying that they just want to sleep. These hot flushes are only able to sleep 2 hours a night. The concern about HRT could be that they've heard on the Daily Mail from a neighbour that it increases the chance of breast cancer. So they're concerned about the increased risk. And then their expectation is that they just want to walk out with a prescription for HRT. So as a GP, it's difficult sometimes in a 10-minute appointment to work out, is the menopause the real problem? Is it something else that's going on? Could it be a thyroid related issue? Could it be anxiety and depression causing the brain fog? Or is it the menopause? We have to think, is HRT prescribing safe for this patient? We need to find out about their past medical history, family history, and then we need to think about which HRT is the best for this patient. So a little bit about HRT types. At one point, it was very, very simple. There were tablets. Now we've got so many different ways of prescribing ladies HRT. So we still have the oral tablets. We've got topical HRT, which is gels that ladies can rub on to their skin. We've got patches, which have been discussed. We've got the magical Marina coil, which can last 4 years if used in the menopause as HRT. And that's like, it's put in as a normal coil, but is licensed for use in the menopause and HRT. We also have vaginal estrogens that just target the vaginal area. So for people who have vaginal dryness and changes of the skin of the vagina, uncomfortable during intercourse, this is an option. And then with the HRT, we can give cyclical or sequential. So that's how we tell ladies how to take it. So cyclical is that you're taking one hormone for a certain amount of time, then you stop, and then you may have a bleed. Or sequential is when you're taking the same preparation of HRT throughout, and that sort of depends on when your last period was. Okay, so a doctor will not prescribe HRT if you've got any of the following. So a history of breast cancer or other estrogen dependent cancer. So that could be endometrial cancer, so that's uterine cancer. If you've active or recent arterial thromboembolic disease, so that could be angina or a recent heart attack. A current blood clot, conditions that make you clot easy, And you would probably know that by the time you reach your menopause. Undiagnosed vaginal bleeding. This is because we're not sure if there's something sinister that's going on, or untreated endometrial hyperplasia. And that basically means when the lining of the womb is building up and we're not quite sure why, that needs to be treated, because that's a risk factor for developing uterine cancer. Some types of liver disease, we're very cautious because HRT can be broken down in the liver, and uncontrolled hypertension. Okay, so a little bit about cancer and HRT. So if you've had estrogen-driven cancer, it's very unlikely that HRT will be prescribed. It's probably not safe and it's risky for yourself. Topical vaginal estrogen may be an option if you've had breast cancer, but often as GPs we ask the oncologist or the breast specialist just to approve that it's safe for us to do this. Alternatives are certain antidepressants, which can help with the hot flushes, anxiety, and some of the brain fog. So certain antidepressants like citalopram, sertraline, venlafaxine can be prescribed at low doses and it will help. And clonidine, so this is an old-fashioned blood pressure medication that was used quite a lot in the 80s as an alternative to HRT. It was found that ladies that were on clonidine for their high blood pressure had less HRT symptoms. So that's another option. It's non-hormonal and you may find that it helps with menopausal symptoms. Okay, so a little bit about risks, because this is what a lot of ladies are concerned about. So the Lancet is a very well-known medical journal. They did a large meta-analysis and they looked at women who've been using HRT in the early 2000s compared to those who developed breast cancer and had never used HRT. So the ladies who never used HRT, their background risk of developing breast cancer was 13 in 1,000. The ladies who took sequential HRT, they had an extra 7 cases of breast cancer, and those taking continuous HRT, there was an extra 10 cases per 1,000. For those ladies who were just using the topical vaginal estrogen, as you can see, very safe, there were no extra cases. However, this is quite an old study and new studies are coming on, and it did have its limitations. So some of the newer preparations weren't included, they weren't even around. And we know now that even the newer preparations have a lower risk for breast cancer. A little bit about HRT, risks and benefits. So we know that HRT can increase the risk of breast and ovarian cancers, and these risks can carry on for a few years after taking HRT. It can also affect womb cancer risk, so that's uterine cancer, but that depends on the different types of HRT that you're taking. It can also increase some other conditions like heart disease and strokes. But if your blood pressure is well controlled, this risk will massively reduce. We need to think about the benefits of HRT. So it reduces menopausal symptoms. It makes a massive difference to the quality of women's lives. Okay, and how does HRT compare to other things? So minimising HRT prescribing could prevent 1,400 cases per year. But keeping a healthy weight, so having your BMI between 20 and 25, could prevent 13,200 cancer cases per year. And actually being overweight is the biggest risk factor for having uterine cancer. And of course, we know that smoking is a massive risk factor. So if we could all be smoke-free, we could prevent 22,000 cancer cases. So that really puts HRT, really gives us a good idea about HRT and its real risk, doesn't it? So sometimes patients come in and say, well, what's the best HRT? What would you have? So it really does depend on the patient, their lifestyle, their expectations and risk factors. But if somebody's wanting the safest, we know that a micronized progesterone, so that's something called utrogesterone, and transdermal estrogen. So that's estrogen prescribed as a pump that can be rubbed on, is very safe, or the Mirena coil and the transdermal estrogen. If you asked a lot of female gynecological consultants what they would do if they were going through the menopause, a lot of them and GPs would say the Mirena coil and transdermal estrogen. It's very, very safe and you are in control. With the estrogen in a gel, you can put 1 squirt on, or if that doesn't help with your menopausal symptoms, you can even use 2 squirts. And talk to your doctor about prescribing that. A little bit about the production of HRT. So synthetic HRT is made from products in labs. These are all regulated. They're not exactly the same as human hormones, but they are very, very similar. And we know exactly how they're absorbed, metabolized, and the risk factors. Some HRT are made with horse urine, that one particularly called Premarin. However, we don't prescribe that as much now. Now, sometimes people come to see me and talk about bioidentical HRT. So these are not regulated. We can't prescribe these on the NHS, and it is risky. So it's made in combinations unique to the person. We're not sure exactly what is in this hormonal tablets, and sometimes it's got steroids in, which isn't needed and can be risky. What about a natural menopause? So for people who can't take HRT or don't want to take tablets, what's good for them? So there are herbal preparations like black clover, red cohosh, increasing sage. There is some evidence that can help minimise menopausal symptoms. Increased intake of phytoestrogens, so things like soya milk. We know that in areas of the world like Japan and China, where they have a lot of soya milk, women say that their menopausal symptoms seem to be less than where people don't have as much phytoestrogens. So there might be a little bit of evidence about increasing your phytoestrogen intake, so having soya milk with your tea, coffee, cereal. Acupuncture does work for menopausal symptoms, and I've personally had some really good experiences with patients who now feel like their hot flushes are well under control. So we know about general lifestyle things like what was said before, so keeping a healthy weight, minimize alcohol, caffeine, stop smoking. These can all make your menopause worse and can be triggers for having a bad night's sleep. Exercise regularly outside if you can do, wear cotton clothes, mindfulness and meditation. There is evidence that that's very good at helping with menopausal symptoms. Okay, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much indeed. We'll just swap places again, Emma and I, and then we'll dip down the screen and then we'll take some questions from anybody if Jane wants to send some questions through.
Questions actually for all of the panel, but first of all, if I thank Dr. Emma for her presentation there, thank you very much. You've got quite a few questions coming in now, Dr. Emma, so if I could ask a couple of these first of all. So if I come to Maz's first of all on the Q&A pop-up, the first question is, how are these determined if you haven't had periods due to Mirena coil, for example? Anything could you say there?
Can you just say that again, please? It just cut out a little bit.
Okay, yes. It's saying, how are these determined if you haven't had periods due to Mirena coil?
Okay, so if somebody's having menopausal symptoms like the hot flushes and brain fog and vaginal dryness, that is a good indicator that they are going through the menopause. Obviously, with the Mirena coil, one of the things with that is that causes lack of periods or very irregular periods. So if the Mirena coil had been put in within 4 years, I would be happy to trial that lady if she was healthy and no contraindications on a topical estrogen to see if that improved her symptoms. Not having a period is obviously a clinical sign of the menopause, but we have to think about different contraceptions. So ladies with the Mirena coil, the depot, some progesterone only pills, people have very irregular periods or they don't have periods. So we ask a really good history and go from there, really.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question about what if the GP won't even consider HRT and they just say no? What would you say to that?
Well, that's a really tough one. I would say to the patient to ask them why. Is it because they are worried about something in the patient's medical history? Or if it is that the GP has just got a vendetta against HRT, see another GP. Most GP surgeries, there are other GPs there. Go and get a second opinion.
Yeah, so see one of the other GPs that are available to you. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Okay, staying on this kind of with you if we can, is soya milk advised for people with hypothyroid, as I've heard that this can interfere with the absorption of levothyroxine, if I'm saying that correctly?
Well, levothyroxine is a treatment for hypothyroidism, so thyroid's not working. When you take that tablet, you need to make sure that you take it at breakfast time, and you need to be sure that you're not taking anything that interacts with it. Now, I have heard as well that soya milk can interact with levothyroxine, so that's a good question to ask the pharmacist. But I've got a feeling that it does, but I can't be 100%. But ask your pharmacist about that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Dr. Emma. I think those responses are really helpful. I've got more questions here, so if we can stay with them. I'm going to come to the question that was asked in advance, and perhaps, if you can decide who's the best one to answer it, that would be really helpful. So a question that was presented in advance was, I had breast cancer 3 years ago. I've been taking tamoxifen, but seem to be getting even more brain fog than before. The person who sent the question is 51. Didn't show any menopause symptoms prior to the breast cancer. Starting to worry about being able to effectively carry out her job, as finding it difficult even to remember people's names some days. Is there anything homeopathic that she can try and try and combat that? Any ideas there?
You go first and then I'll go second. So you answer the doctor part of that.
So that lady's on tamoxifen, history of breast cancer. So HRT is not an option for that lady. As a GP, we could prescribe something like an antidepressant, a low dose of an SSRI antidepressant, and that's very good at helping ladies with the brain fog. So that's a definite option for something that we can prescribe medically that may be suitable for this lady. And I've seen lots of ladies in that situation have a brilliant result with a little dose of citalopram.
Yeah, and I would echo that actually, in the fact that when I'm presenting and I'm face to face with people, and I said this on the Resilient Menopause workshop, is that people wait until they can't wait another day before they go and speak to the GP. They wait until they're really, really desperate. And what we're trying to say is go and speak to your GP anyway and arm yourself with knowledge, because that's what they'll do. They'll give you that content. So I really do echo what Emma says about maybe a low grade SSRI, but equally as well, I'd be looking at nutrition that actively impacts upon the manufacture of serotonin naturally in the brain. So for this, we're looking at protein foods, and we really do need to make sure that there is some protein, a small amount of protein in every snack, and a good amount of protein in every single meal. In terms of protein, we're looking at, on average, and this is on average, because I obviously don't know anybody on the webinar, but on average, you're around about 1 gram to 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So say somebody is 80 kilos, then it will be 80 grams of protein a day. Now, I see a lot of people that fall very much shorter than 80 grams of protein a day, and the body doesn't store the components of protein, which are called amino acids, and it's amino acids that manufacture the neurotransmitters in the brain. So if we're not eating enough protein foods throughout the day, then what can happen is we can become deficient in amino acids, and literally amino acids manufacture the neurotransmitters that are stimulatory, that help you to have clarity of thought, so dopamine, and they help improve focus, concentration, and then also the inhibitory neurotransmitters such as GABA aminobutyric acid that actually calms the body down. So we really do need to make sure of that. Equally as well, the lady said 51 that you mentioned, and on the slides that we did talk about the fact that the brain starts to atrophy, you know, up to 50s and beyond, 5% of the hippocampus. So again, you're looking there at components to help to really help with cellular renewal in the brain, and these components are healthy fats. So you need to make sure that your diet is rich in really good quality polyunsaturated fats, very similar to the fats that are in the Mediterranean menopause plan that I mentioned. So that salad that I've put on there is really rich in the different fats that will help to feed the brain. Jane, you know me. What do we have at 3 o'clock every day?
We have an egg.
We have an egg.
We have a boiled egg.
At 3 o'clock. A boiled egg, and the reason being, fats are very high in a particular, rather eggs are very high in a particular fat called choline, and choline is one of the most abundant fats in the brain. So a boiled egg, pop it on in the morning, keep it in the shell, take it anywhere with you, and then at 3 o'clock open it, you get your choline, you'll get about between 8 or 9 grams of protein in there, and a whole host of B vitamins. And what B vitamins do is they help to activate the energy in the protein. So just finally on this lady, I see a spiral of decline. So I'm worried about my memory, I'm worried about, and then that then creates a graduation going downwards in energy and kind of brain acuity, if you like. So I think what we've both said combined can be really useful.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, and yes, the boiled eggs can be great. It can make you a bit unpopular if you're in an open plan office, but as we're all working from home now, it doesn't really matter. Great. So we've got another question coming in on the chat. Since having a total hysterectomy 3 years ago, aged 35, I've noticed my joints are hurting more, in particular hips and pelvis, and some cracks quite loudly. I'm on low-level HRT, but I'm worried about joint bone health. What can I do to help alleviate that? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think if she came to see me as a GP, I would be really concerned about what she's saying. I think I would want to increase her HRT to sort of boost her bones, get them remodeling and getting more healthy. I would be making sure that she's doing some weight-bearing exercise regularly, making sure that her diet is brilliant, lots of calcium, vitamin D. I think if she's feeling that her bones are crumbling and achy, she may need some imaging, maybe a DEXA scan or an X-ray, just to have a look at exactly what's going on. But she's very young, isn't she, to be having those symptoms? So I would be concerned as a GP. So yeah, there's a lot of things I'd want to do.
So maybe some exploratory system with a doctor. What I would say is estrogen has a very lubricative nature within the body, which is one of the reasons why when estrogen levels fall, the people can experience vaginal dryness and painful sex, because as long as lubrication, it also helps the vagina to expand. So I would say and also we know that the decline in estrogen can also have an impact on joints as well. So I would say making sure that a diet is rich in like flax seeds, so maybe introduce flax seeds into the nutrition, chia seeds. Every day I have a dessert spoon of chia seeds in a glass of, in a glass, well, you can just pass me that actually, I'll show them. In this, which is 1 whole lime, peeled and put in as if it was an egg, a whole lime, an inch of ginger in the NutriBullet with some hot water, zhuzh that up into like a fluid. Then I add 1 dessert spoon of chia seeds and 1 teaspoon of honey. And I have that every single day, and it's medicinal for me. So chia seeds are in a drink, or flax seeds on a food, but also I'll be taking a supplement of maybe some evening primrose oil, along with making sure that your diet is rich, as Dr. Emma said, in phosphorus containing foods, vitamin D and calcium.
Okay, lovely, that's great. Deborah has asked, what about if you've had a hysterectomy? Any thoughts on that?
So she's had a hysterectomy and she's got menopausal symptoms. Well, if you've had a hysterectomy, you don't need the progesterone aspect of HRT. So obviously there's nowhere to put the Mirena coil in, and we wouldn't be prescribing a progesterone part of HRT. So she would be perfect candidate for having topical estrogen, so the rub-on gel. She could be in control of how much she uses of that. So that's a good thing for her to have a think about, just using the estrogen.
And I think what Emma and I always say is HRT now in 2020 is not the HRT of the 1970s. So Emma's already alluded to the fact that there are so many ways now to take HRT. Even the fact that you can control how much you think you need on a daily basis can be, you know, it gives back that control to that individual. You know, if she's had a hysterectomy, then she will have been plunged into a menopause. So she's probably already had a lot of symptoms that can be incredibly confusing, especially when they are on immediate onset. So from my side, obviously, I will talk about making sure your diet's rich in all the vitamins and minerals we've talked about before. And just experimenting with that. You know, what foods do you see that you lack in your diet, and how can you incorporate them? I'm a great believer. I mean, I'm obsessed when I see people in supermarkets. I follow them around because I'm a great believer that we shop. Don't we shop habitually? So we tend to buy similar things week in, week out. And part of the coaching thing that we do, and I loved listening to your coach, Claire, you were talking about your coach. Part of the coaching thing we do, as you know, Jane, because you've been on it many years ago, is creating a discomfort in how you shop, and forcing people out of a comfort zone, and forcing people to, you know, we're doing an elimination diet, so you're not allowed that, not allowed that, not allowed that. So you have to find different alternatives, and when people find them different alternatives, very often they keep them in because they can see the impact that can have. So I think looking at the nutrition, looking at how she shops, the kind of food she buys, and making sure that the diet is as varied as possible, and very predominantly, I would also say, plant-based.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to come to a question now for you, Clare, if I may. And this comes from Lisa Sykes, and just a question around what's a good way to approach this at work and your working life. So thinking about you being open, sharing about your experience, what would you advise as a good way to approach this for people at work?
I'd be having a conversation with my manager, you know, and having that open conversation, and not accepting, you know, people being uncomfortable with it. Luckily, my manager isn't uncomfortable with it, so we do have conversations. And I'd also try and think of those practical things. So what I did was really try and track stress triggers, because that definitely gives me more hot flushes, which definitely then keep me awake at night. And once I started keeping, I'm not very good at keeping journals religiously, but once I started just keeping a quick jot in my diary, I started to see that there were certain triggers. So, you know, if the week got really intense, you know, with sort of quite formal meetings, or there was something coming along in a few weeks that was just mithering me a bit, and just thinking about, was there a different way of doing it, you know, that would make it less stressful for me? Or, you know, could I do things like, you know, like Jeanette's talking about, just being a little bit more conscious about my diet and making sure I did get out for that walk, you know, and just some techniques like that played to my sort of practical sort of side of my personality. But I do think there's a big conversation to have, not just with us as individuals. I think, you know, if we can get organisations as a whole to start to think about this, again, I go back to that thing that it'll benefit everybody. you know. So again, you know, it's about taking individual responsibility, but then asking for help from the wider population, the wider organisation, or your family. You know, it isn't just down to you. And just starting to think about those things. And just on the course of this call this morning, I'm thinking, you know, is there something around having, you know, some informal networks at work for people, just to start this conversation going, really, and start to have those chats and thoughts about what could we change structurally, you know, that would make this work and keep women in the workplace for longer.
I really like the thought of those menopause champions that someone mentioned earlier on. You know, we've got mental health first aiders now. We've got health and wellbeing champions. Why not? You know, that's a fantastic way to get this out in the open, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Great idea.
And there's some agreement in the chat as well from some of the participants about losing female talent from the sector too. So you could be onto something there. Jeanette, were you about to say something?
Two things, if I may, is coming back to Claire about the resilience, and that links into everything I've said about you know, from my observations and my own personal experience. If you go into the menopause and physiologically we are, for want of a better word, deficient and stressed, then what kind of menopause do you think you're going to have? And when I started on the menopause, one thing that I found was exactly what Claire was saying. There was a direct link between being stressed and the impact of the menopause. And that was very interesting to me as a scientist, because I was looking at my body, you know, from a scientific perspective. And I distinctly remember a few times when I had an acute stress. So say I was in the car and somebody cut me up and I banged my foot on the brake, I would literally feel a flush. I'd feel my skin on my top of my hands burn, like tingle, and I'd get a flush. So I knew then there was a direct link between the pituitary gland and the hippocampus and the hypothalamus and the adrenal glands. And so that's why I really believe in strengthening them adrenals to reduce the impacts of the menopause symptoms. And then going back to what Paula was saying about menopause, first aid champions. Do you know, my experience of that is, I think it's a great thing to have a mental health champion, but I think it's one-dimensional. This is only my experience. So they understand about mental health, but we need to broaden that. And that's why I think the menopause champions on top of that, or even for people that are not even a mental health champion, has to be the next step. So, you know, I mean, please, you know, support us in that, because it's a brand new course, it's fantastic, and we want to get as many people, you know, kind of qualified in that, so that we get that message. And like you said, Claire, get that on the table so that there's conversations to be had and we're retaining that talent.
Okay, another question around symptoms possibly is from Lisa, which says, my feet and ankles are stiff. Is this part of the menopause?
Well, I would go back to it depends where she's, obviously, in what stage of the menopause she's in. I would go back to the lack of estrogen, so the decline in estrogen. Estrogen, it has a lubricative impact on the body. So, you know, there can be a tendency for some stiffness. But again, I'd also, you know, Dr. Emma would also say, maybe it's a time to go and see a GP and get some more tests. I don't know.
Yeah, it depends on how old this lady is, what other symptoms. Probably she needs to be examined and have a history taken from her GP just to make sure, you know, what exactly is going on. But it could be that it is a menopausal symptom.
Because there are so many and varied. And somebody in the chat here said, I've heard there's menopause symptoms. You know, I'm seeing new ones. Yeah, and I'm seeing new ones. Whenever I do a workshop, somebody brings a new one in that might be very specific to them, but that is a change in their physiology. And it can be a worrisome thing, or they can find it not funny, but just, oh, that's unusual. I didn't expect to get that. So they are very many and very, very varied, for sure.
Okay, thank you. And what about if you've had the Mirena coil fitted and you've not had a period for over 8 years? What would you say about that?
That can happen with the Mirena coil. It can cause lack of periods or very irregular periods. If you're still having menopausal symptoms with the Mirena coil, then go for a topical estrogen. But the Mirena coil, it's licensed for 4 years as the as part of HRT. So make sure that your marina coil has been changed. When you have a marina coil fitted, you're given a card saying when you need a new one fitted. So always make sure that it's not running out, especially if it's being prescribed as a contraceptive.
Okay, great, thank you. Got lots of questions. Are you still okay? Still all right? Still firing on all cylinders to get them? You've got another one here. Vaginal dryness is a real problem for me. I'm post-menopause and have tried estrogen vaginal cream as prescribed by my GP to no avail. Have you got any suggestions, please?
Right. Well, when I prescribe it, I always say to use it every night for 2 weeks, and then to use it twice to 3 times a week for another sort of 4 weeks, and then to find out what works. But it might be that that lady needs the vaginal estrogens plus another type of lubricant. So we can prescribe a lubricant called Yes or Replens, or there's one called Silk as well. These are non-hormonal, and actually using both the hormonal and non-hormonal, it really does help. So perhaps she needs to think about upping the dose of the, or upping the frequency of using the estrogen vaginal cream and using something like Silk or Yes.
And from my side, it's I'd say it's quite tentative, because what Emma's saying really is going to have the biggest impact. But I would say make sure that the exercise is going on. You want good circulation. To have good sex and blood flow, the body needs to be well oxygenated. You need good circulation. So I would include foods that are high in iron to help with circulation in the system. Get some oxygenation in there. Do some exercise, maybe some yoga, and then equally as well. This all, sex is about what happens before sex. A lot of sex is in the mind. So looking at calming the system down, resilience type stuff around calming that vagus nerve. We have this particular thing called a vagus nerve, and it helps to balance our autonomic nervous system, and helping to calm that down will possibly help the sex in the mind, which then can help the sexual activity.
Okay,
if that makes sense.
Thank you. Is it true if you leave one ovary in, it will delay full-blown menopause? This is an interesting one for me.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it?
Yes.
So if you're going to have a hysterectomy and you have both ovaries taken out, then that is cessation of estrogen and progesterone, like that. If you keep one ovary in, then you're going to get, if there's ovaries in there and it's active, and the eggs are active,
Yes.
you will get estrogen. So that chart that I showed you at the beginning, where you've got the up to 14 days and then the estrogen peaks, then the ovulation, then progesterone, that will happen even with one ovary, even although it will be diminished, of course.
Yes.
Okay, great. We've got a question about men from Victoria. Do men experience the atrophy of the hippocampus, or is it just because of the drop in estrogen?
So I saw that question. I'm glad you asked that, because it's not the estrogen that causes the atrophy of the hippocampus. That's just a natural aging process. It's the prefrontal cortex that really does enjoy that estrogen, so that's very reliant upon that for memory and focus. But the hippocampus atrophy is separate to that. I was just alluding to that in terms of aging. So yes, men do, because we all age.
Yeah, and I know in previous talks I've heard you do, Jeanette, you've talked about how men are impacted by their own form of menopause. Is there anything you'd say about that?
Well, men don't have a menopause, because the actual word menopause means the end of the menses, which is the end of menstruation. But men do have an andropause. I don't know if you want to talk about this as well, but men have an andropause, which is essentially the lower levels of testosterone towards the end, mid to the end of the 40s, and naturally the testosterone levels fall, and testosterone is a hormone, and it is connected to mood, and so the impact of that you can see for some men. Again, the men that are particularly sensitive to the decline of this testosterone, you will see a fluctuation in mood at times. You can see a change in the fat disposition in the body, so you know the kind of moves that men get, more fat around the visceral fat around the waist. So yeah, absolutely, and we are trying our best as an organisation to get companies interested in this andropause, because for some men it very genuinely can have an impact. And what I love when we come and do workshops, and we did some great workshops for K&H and First Choice Homes recently before lockdown, and we had tons of men in the room for the menopause workshops. So when we just alluded just very briefly to the andropause, they sat up really straight. I want to know this. So there's an interest there. And again, you know, Jane, I'm always talking about when we come into organisations and we're doing our expertise around well-being, the people that are already really well can't wait to see us because they want to know more. What else can you give me? What else can you give me? But oftentimes in organisations, it's the people that are less inclined to engage in well-being that need that well-being. So if we can hook them by helping to improve energy, everybody wants more energy, help them to improve sleep. Everybody wants to sleep better. You've got a buy-in then, and when you've got that buy-in, you can then give them more information. That's right. My belief.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we've got a few more questions. I'm keeping an eye on time, but I do think we've got a few more questions we can fit in. Question from Lynn is, can you be at higher risk of stroke in these stages? And this came in during your session, actually, Jeanette. So can you be at higher risk of stroke during some of the stages?
Well, definitely with the menopause, there is an increased risk of stroke, but that's not to do with going through the menopause. It's the fact that as people get older, there is an increased risk of stroke. We know that HRT can possibly increase the risk of stroke, especially if blood pressure isn't well controlled. But I don't think that it's particularly to do with the dwindling hormones. I think it's more to do with as people are getting older, you know, blood pressure can go up, the blood vessels are getting a little bit harder and less resistant and things like that. I think that it's down to that, not about the menopause.
I would say that everything that Emma said, but also that estrogen has a very protective role within a woman's body. So we, up until we become premenopausal, perimenopausal, we have a less of a percentage increase. Propensity to have heart disease. That's correct, isn't it? Because we have estrogen and it's very protective. But once we hit the menopause and estrogen levels start to decline, our ability, if you like, for want of a better word, to experience heart disease becomes on level with men. So and as Emma just said, you know, the body starts to age. We start to, on some level, develop some maybe some atherosclerotic plaque. Hardening can start to occur, but that's more along with age rather than a symptom of the menopause. But if somebody is coming up to the menopause and they have a history of heart disease in their family, that's most definitely certainly something they need to discuss with the GP. Because the GP, I'm speaking for Emma, but the GP might put them on a HRT just as a protective mechanism to have that estrogen in there. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, that's an option.
Okay. And then this is the last question I'm going to take from the chat, and then I'm going to come to the ones that are in Q&A for the final few minutes, if that's okay. So following a blood test, I was told I had started the menopause. How can you determine what stage of the menopause you're at if you're still taking the contraceptive pill which prevents your periods?
That is a really complicated question, and I am trainee doctors. It takes them a while. Well, if you're on the hormonal contraceptive pill, you shouldn't have actually had the blood test because it's going to be a false reading. What we advise is that people stop taking the contraceptive pill. They have the FSH blood test, that's the menopausal one, taken. If that's raised, we repeat that in another 6 weeks. If that's raised, then we say, yeah, that is a good indicator that you are menopausal, but we would still advise that you carry on with contraception for another year after that.
Okay, all right.
And that's an interesting one of the questions that's often asked, that's not, I've seen it's not asked in these questions unless you've got it in the chat, is can I get pregnant whilst taking HRT? That's a question, isn't it? Yes. And yes, you can. It's not a contraceptive. So there's been many a baby been born, you know, because people think that HRT is a contraception. No, it's not.
No, and that's another reason why the Mirena coil is so good, because it's a contraceptive. It can be used as HRT as well. So it's sort of two-pronged approach. So that's why all GPs love that.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Good tip there as well, I think. Okay, so the next question is from Michelle, and you may have already covered this a little bit, but let's just see. What can I do to help if I have very little mobility to reduce symptoms?
Sorry, we didn't hear that, Jen. It broke up. That.
Sorry. What can I do to help if I have very little mobility to reduce symptoms?
No. Sorry, it just broke up again. Sorry, Jen. I don't know why. It's just we can't hear you.
Okay. What can I do to help if I have very little mobility to reduce symptoms?
All right. So what can I do to help if she's got very low mobility to help to reduce symptoms?
Sorry. Yeah.
Well, first and foremost, from my side, I would be looking at making sure that you're matching your energy in to your body with your energy out. So if you've got low mobility, it's very, very important that you don't overeat and then put extra pressure on all of your organs and then gain weight. That's a big thing. We do know that there's a link between obesity and a higher incidence of menopause symptoms, particularly hot flushes and night sweats. So that's really important. It's important as well that the diet is really healthy. There's undeniably, and Claire mentioned this with the midget gems, I think, or something. There's a definite link between a high sugar diet and high alcohol and greater incidences of hot sweats and night flushes, without a doubt. So again, you know, a low sugar diet would be really good. Make sure you're getting some sugars in. You do need glucose. It's a primary fuel for the brain. But from my side, make sure you're matching energy in with energy out. If you've got low mobility, you really need to make sure that you're not putting too many calories in your system. It'll overload your system and it'll just create excess weight.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's all about what you can do yourself. So, you know, diet, looking at what you're not taking in, as Jeanette said. And then, you know, when you've optimised your lifestyle and you're still having issues, then come and see your GP.
And I would, that's a great way for Emma to describe that. When you have optimised your lifestyle, so when the individual has taken that degree of responsibility, and again, linking back to what Claire said about, you know, when you had your coach, that was about that adaptation that I talked about right at the very beginning. How are we going to adapt my lifestyle, what I'm doing, to this particular transitional phase of my life? So, for example, with First Choice Homes, we've just provided some seated exercises. So, you know, exercise you can do sat at your desk or sat on a chair or sat in a wheelchair, whatever it might be, that you can do, very simple ones to get that lymphatic system going and to stimulate that circulation.
Okay, I'm going to sneak another question in, even though we are getting close to time, but just as we were talking about Mirena coil, another question came in linked to it, from Lisa. Had her coil fitted over 4 years ago, have mentioned that, but it hasn't been removed. Anything?
Okay. So, really with Lisa, you need to know how old she is and why she had the Mirena coil in. If it's for contraception, then you can have it in for 5 years and then it needs to be changed. If it is for HRT, it needs to be every 4 years that it's changed. It's a bit of a tricky one with the Mirena coil because it's one device, but there's different license depending on why you had it put in. But actually, during COVID, Marina Coyle did get in contact with all the hospitals, all the GPs who provide them, and said that actually with COVID, we know that you're not seeing patients face to face. They can last an extra year. So that would be 6 years if it's contraceptive, or 5 for HRT. But phone up your GP or whoever put the Marina Coyle in, and just find out, are they back fitting them?
Okay, great. And even though we're coming to the end, we've just got a minute left, we're still getting questions coming in. So this is obviously a topic that's very interesting to people. One that I wanted to finish with was, where can people get some of your food nutrient recommendations, Jeanette? Is there a website that they can go to?
Yes, well, they can go to Manchester Stress, so it's www.manchesterstress.com, and I'd love to see them there. And I'm just putting the finishing touches now to a menopause nutrition plan. So if they want to register with me there, then I can send them details of that when that is finished. As soon as I've got some time to do some deep work on that, I will. But please do get in contact if you're interested in the Menopause Champions. And Jane, when I send you the slides, if you wouldn't mind sharing that, and people can get in touch. And the next cohort of Menopause Champions is in 4 weeks' time, beginning of November. So yeah, please, it'd be great. And they'll share so much content, and even just newsletters, you know, that give recipes and tips and things like that. You know, the more we get them, the more we keep it in our psyche, the more we're going to share, aren't we? I think.
Yes, yeah.
I think that's a key thing.
And what we were saying before the session started, because there was such a good uptake from people, because we got to 100 people signing on for today's webinar, discussed with Emmeline from Wish that we'd perhaps do a follow-up session. So perhaps we can do that and answer some of the questions that we haven't got to today. We can follow up with that for everybody that's joined today's webinar. But before we go, sorry, Jeanette.
Say, I think given the level of interest today, I think it might be a nice idea to have a think about maybe a couple of masterclasses, so that we target areas of the menopause, because questions that Emma and I are taking are so varied, so there's such an interest in it. So maybe if we do a couple of series of masterclasses, so something around menopause and sex, you know, menopause and, you know, HRT, and we do some specific ones, then I think that will tailor it more, and we can take smaller amounts of people, maybe limit it, and then we can, I think that'll just be really productive for you guys.
Yeah, and we can help whatever people need. Yeah, great. Okay, so I want to take the opportunity to thank our sponsors once again for enabling this event to take place today and bring it out to so many people. And then Paula and I'm sure I speak for Paula, we would like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists too. So we've got Claire, thank you so much, Dr. Emma and Jeanette. So thank you, and hopefully we'll be speaking to you all once again.
Yeah. Amazing. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a good weekend. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.